Hi, this is Corey Franklin with Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight, the entire program is devoted to Roger Boisjoly. Roger Boisjoly died at the age of 74 recently, and he was an engineer at Morton-Thiokol who was a critical person in the Challenger disaster in 1986. Roger Boisjoly was a modern-day Cassandra. The explosion after liftoff of the Space Shuttle Challenger caused the death of 7 astronauts. The cause of the explosion was the failure of O-rings to seal on the Space Shuttle, and Roger Boisjoly was the engineer who realized that the O-rings would not seal at cold temperatures, the temperatures at which the shuttle was launched on that January day. For his work, he won a prize for scientific freedom and responsibility by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, but this was slim consolation for him because he could not prevent the actual disaster even though he predicted it, and he was actually blackballed after the fact by Morton-Thiokol and NASA, and his story is a tragic cautionary tale, the classic whistleblower dilemma. I'm going to let him introduce it with a talk he gave on scientific ethics, and then it will be carried through by the television program Challenger Countdown to Disaster, which features some recreations of him, some live interviews with him. The other main character is Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize-winning scientist who was on the Rogers Commission that investigated the Challenger disaster. His words are based on the actual words he said during the commission report, and his role is a recreation. The program begins with an introduction by Roger Boisjoly and then starts with him noticing O-ring damage on earlier space shuttle flights.
Before I start, I want to preface with a remark. I'm going to show you the NASA feed video of the launch that was piped to all the contractors on the program. I have to tell you, it's the first time I actually saw a launch from my facility. I didn't even know it was viewable from my facility. I was about doing the business on the program for my whole career. And this is the only one I actually saw from my plant. But before I show it to you, I want to impress upon you several things. And although this may sound like a crass statement, it's not meant to be so. It's a Challenger story and used as a case study to help students understand what's going to be coming up, especially. It's not about the death of 7 astronauts. And I know that sounds horrible, but it's not about that. That was a horrible, horrible culmination of the event itself. 7 exceptional people forfeited their lives for such an irresponsible launch system. It's also not about the loss of over $2 billion worth of hardware. What it's about is professionals in the system who had the authority and responsibility and fiduciary interest to do the right thing. And they abdicated that. They abdicated that because they were pressured to do so by the agency called NASA, as you will hear as the story unfolds.
The Space Shuttle program is in full swing. 1 year from now, NASA plans to launch Challenger. At the engineering plant of Morton-Thiokol, a NASA contractor in Utah, Roger Boisjoly discovers the primary O-ring has failed all flight in STS-51B. Despite the O-ring damage, NASA continues its launches. As the summer progresses, Roger Boisjoly is still trying to have his concerns taken seriously on the rocket booster segments. The joints between each segment have to withstand the vast forces produced during blastoff. Each segment is sealed against the next segment with 2 rubber seals, called O-rings. For the rocket boosters to work, the joints have to function perfectly. Part of Roger Boisjoly's job is to make sure they do. 3 days after mission STS-51C lands, Boisjoly starts his inspection of the joints. Even 20 years later, the surprise at what he found that day is still vivid in his mind.
I went around and on the first booster, I found on one of the joints hot gas, massive amount of hot gas from propulsion had actually compromised the primary O-ring. So I thought, my God, we came within about 8 or 10 seconds of failure.
The O-rings are designed to form a seal against the superheated rocket exhaust gases that are produced at incredible pressure during launch. The first O-ring should do the job. The second O-ring is a safety backup. Boisjoly's photos of Flight 51C's joints reveal hard evidence there is a major design flaw. He discovers that hot gas has blasted past the first ring, and burn the second backup O-ring.
I instantly, in my mind, thought, oh, this has to be caused by the cold weather that preceded this launch.
Boisjoly immediately hones in on the one thing that made Flight 51C different: the temperature. Post-flight analysis showed the O-rings were 53 degrees Fahrenheit, unusually cold for a launch. The O-rings are supposed to be flexible. On launch, they squeeze and stretch to seal the gap. But on Flight 51C, the dual O-ring system malfunctioned. The primary seal did not work, and hot gas escaped. Luckily, the second O-ring caught the leak. If it hadn't, the result might have been far more dangerous. The next day, Boisjoly reports his findings to NASA. Together, NASA and Morton-Thiokol conclude that the condition is not desirable but acceptable. Shuttle launches continue, but Boisjoly and his colleagues run further tests. The results are shocking. To their surprise, they discover that the O-rings could also be ineffective, even at room temperature. Boisjoly takes his findings to his boss.
When we went to our manager, who was my boss, and told him about this, he said this material was too sensitive to release to anybody, so he kept it secret. Do you have any idea? You have any idea what that does to somebody who's trying to put flight safety first and foremost on the program, and to have a manager do that to you?
Throughout 1985, NASA has a very ambitious launch schedule. Flight 51C is the first of 9 planned launches, and the pressure is on to keep the shuttle flying. Any delays would ultimately cost money, and jobs were at stake.
They didn't want to hear because I believe they wanted to ensure for the company they would get the follow-on contract that was in negotiations with NASA at that point in time. That contract was worth over $1 billion.
As the weeks pass, Boisjoly's frustration at the lack of action continues to eat away at him. Boisjoly requests a task force to investigate how to fix the problem. His memos become increasingly desperate and aggressive in tone.
Subject SRM erosion. Possible failure criticality. Now, this letter is written to ensure that management is fully aware of the seriousness of the current O-ring erosion problem. It is my honest and very real fear that if we do not designate a team to solve the problem, with the field joint having the highest priority, that we stand in jeopardy of losing a flight.
Bob, did you read my memo? The O-rings, Bob? I really feel there's some urgency here. But the erosion was pretty bad after the last flight. I'll leave it with you.
While Boisjoly struggles to be heard, NASA has already announced the crew for the Challenger flight.
We were writing these memos to try and start a little flame underneath it. To be able to get something done. Because we were concerned. We were extremely concerned. And I think that's what those memos reflect. They reflect frustration and concern.
Boisjoly's tactics are beginning to alienate the management at Morton-Thiokol.
I have been described as a giant pain in the ass, okay? But the same people who described me that way were the same people who called me when they had a problem, after they got to know who I was and what I could do and the experience I had.
Throughout the spring of 1985, Boisjoly struggles to get Morton-Thiokol management to take his O-ring seal concerns seriously.
It was like I was talking to a solid piece of granite. No response, no reaction, no emotion, no anything. We all knew that the joint was defective, and we had no choice but to fly because that's what the managers insisted on. And so it was our job to keep it flying as safe as possible, but we didn't take that lightly.
If Boisjoly is right, it will only be a matter of time before something will fail. On July 19th, 1985, Boisjoly gets some good news.
I thought you'd be pleased to hear we're putting together a task force.
He believes he can do something about the O-rings.
And we were thrilled and working our tails off because we finally got a chance to do what we've been trying to get done now for, 5.5 years.
A few weeks later, Boisjoly's excitement with the task force is crushed.
1 month, one lousy month later, we all realized that we had no power, no authority, no resources, and no management support. Well, how in the heck can you get anything done if you don't have any of those items that I just mentioned. You can't. And the frustration was just absolutely going up minute by minute, day by day.
The launch is rescheduled once again for Tuesday the 28th, even though the weather forecast predicts extremely cold temperatures down in the low 20s.
I first heard about the cold temperatures prior to the launch at 1 o'clock on the day before the launch. And from past experience, it just concerned me terribly. And so we began to question the feasibility of launching at such a low temperature. And we spent the rest of the day raising these questions.
The night before the launch, there was a desperate struggle to stop Challenger from taking off. The temperature the next day is predicted to be more than 10 below freezing. A shuttle has never launched in temperatures so low before.
And that's when it really hit the fan big time. We rushed into a meeting, and 4 or 5 of us decided that we're going to make an attempt to stop the launch. The fact of the matter is, O-rings don't work with a dam at freezing temperatures. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. All you have to have is a modicum of common sense.
Boisjoly and Thompson alert the management at Morton-Thiokol of the dangers posed by launching at such a cold temperature. By early afternoon, their bosses are convinced. They get on the phone with NASA to voice their concerns. Morton-Thiokol recommends against launching, but NASA is reluctant to abort again unless there is hard evidence. They need proof and want to scrutinize Morton-Thiokol's O-ring data before calling it off. A conference call between Morton-Thiokol and NASA is planned for 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We ran literally to our offices and basically rummaged through reports and file cabinets.
Just grab the current data and go.
We had 45 lousy minutes to prepare for the most important technical meeting of our careers. It was now quitting time. Everybody left. We were on our own. Never before in history of spaceflight had there been a company stand up and try to stop the launch of anything. I'm talking about unmanned as well as manned. Nobody, no company's ever done that.
This is the moment Boisjoly has been waiting for. Finally, after a year of memos and calls, he has a chance to be heard. As they gather in the meeting room, the Morton-Thiokol team are confident they will be able to stop the launch.
Yes.
They know NASA would not go against a contractor's recommendation. By 8:45 p.m., the call from NASA is connected. Launch is just 13 hours away. The success of this mission and the lives of the 7 astronauts hang on one simple question. How will the O-rings react to the cold temperatures predicted for launch the next morning?
At low temperatures, the O-rings are not so elastic. They won't seal properly. It'll be like putting a brick into a crack versus a sponge. The grease, too, will be affected. It will be thicker and not as slick. We will have a higher O-ring actuation time, and if that happens, we will approach the threshold of secondary seal pressurization capability. So we have a situation where neither the primary seal nor the secondary seal will function.
After half an hour, the presentation is finished, and spirits among the engineers at Morton-Thiokol are high.
I'm a little confused by your presentation, Thiokol. You're telling me that we can't launch under 53 degrees, yet your own data suggests that you had blow-by on the O-rings when we launched at 75 degrees.
The blow-by was definitely worse at the lower temperature.
Then Malloy asked for Morton-Thiokol's launch recommendation. Their decision comes down to Joe Kilminster.
I have maximum of 10% confidence that he's going to stand by what we went into the meeting with, and that was everybody was totally supportive of not launching. And much to my surprise, Kilminster answers and says,
So I guess our conclusions are that we should not fly outside of our database, which is 53 degrees.
And metaphorically inside of my body, I went, yes! And I was absolutely on top of the world. That lasted for about 10 seconds.
The engineers at Morton-Thiokol are confident NASA will stop the Challenger launch. They now wait for the official response.
For God's sake, Morton-Thiokol, when do you want me to launch? Next April? You guys are generating new launch criteria here. Joe, we have been flying for 4 years with a known condition in these joints considered and accepted by Thiokol, accepted by me and all levels of NASA management. Think about this. Think about your data.
To the layperson, that might not mean much, but to us inside, in the program, fully knowledgeable of what's going on, those are metaphorical buzzwords for you're screwing up my launch schedule.
Only NASA can postpone a launch. All Morton-Thiokol can do is make a recommendation. Now, Larry Malloy at Kennedy asked George Hardy at Marshall for his opinion.
When George speaks, everybody listens, because George is one of the most highly recognized engineer managers on the program.
Thiokol, I am appalled, but I won't go against the contractor. In that case, I can't recommend launch.
It's the second no vote, because he would not overrule the contractor. But it's also something else. When he said he was appalled, that was a killer. Absolute killer.
With their next multi-million-dollar contract still under negotiation with NASA, the Morton-Thiokol managers are under intense pressure. At this point, Senior Vice President Gerald Mason intervenes.
Joe, ask him to take a 5-minute caucus offline. We have to make a management decision. Let's look over the data again and consider Larry Malloy's points.
If we launch at the predicted temperatures, we are out of our experience base. Even if we take 40 degrees as the temperature floor, we are still way out of our database. In launching at these low temperatures, we are moving away from goodness.
To the engineers' dismay, the managers ignore them and hold a private conversation. It's clear the managers are changing their minds.
I am so angry and so mad and so frustrated that I slam the photographs down and I'm screaming at them because I saw what they did to Arnie. To look at avoid what they're telling us. It's very... The lower the temperature, the more hot gas gets past the joint, as you see in this photograph of the January 1985 flight. I angrily picked up the photographs and returned to my position at the table, and I basically put my head down on my arms, and I was so close to losing it.
Let's take a vote. Do we recommend a launch?
Every stinking piece of data we had, 14 charts, one of which was the title page, pointed to a reason not to launch. You can't launch with this data. It's impossible. The vice president of engineering is on the fence, and now he's being pressured to change his mind.
Bob, you have to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat.
Our position is that although temperature effects are a concern, the data predicting blow-by are inconclusive. Are there any disagreements or any other comments concerning the Thiokol recommendation?
At NASA, the silence means go for launch.
When I opened the door from the garage to my house in Willard, the first thing that my wife said to me is, "What's wrong?" I said, "Oh, nothing, honey." I said, "I had a great day." But I says, it ended up in a meeting. I says, "We're going to launch tomorrow and kill the astronauts." But outside of that, it was a great day.
The temperature plummets. The astronauts pass the time thinking that tomorrow will be another scrub. Out on the launch pad, icicles as long as 18 inches are forming on the shuttle. Despite the low temperatures, Challenger will launch the next morning.
McNair, pilot Mike Smith, followed by Listen Sala, Future in Space, Ellison Onizuka, and payload specialist Greg Jarvis. Big smiles today.
We're ready today. The teacher observer, Krista McAuliffe, has been handed an apple by the closeout crew.
Good morning, Krista. Hope we go today. Good morning.
The temperature hits 36 degrees, 30 degrees colder than any previous shuttle launch.
2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it is cleared to tower.
Throttling up, 3 engines down, 100.
4% Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up. 15 seconds, velocity 2,900 feet per second.
I was sitting there, and the vehicle ignites and clears the launch tower, and I turn to Bob and whisper,
Looks like we dodged a bullet.
because we had all expected it to blow up in the pad, because that's what the propellant experts in engineering had told us.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that.
President Reagan cancels his State of the Union address to speak to a shocked world.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now would like to call this first meeting of the Presidential Commission on the Space Shuttle Challenger accident to order. I want to start with just a couple of preliminary remarks. As you know,
NASA presents the commission with various possible reasons for the shuttle failure. Roger Boisjoly is one of the engineers called to the hearings to explain how the solid rocket boosters operate. According to Boisjoly, Morton-Thiokol's lawyers have told him to answer questions, but to not offer any extra information. He decides not to be silenced.
My name is Roger Boisjoly, and I'm in the structures section. And I've been involved with these seals and the rings basically since coming to Thiokol some 5.5 years ago.
NASA and Morton-Thiokol already suspect that the solid rocket boosters are somehow to blame. Boisjoly tells the commission he knew a year ago that the O-rings in the solid rocket boosters can fail under some circumstances, and that if the primary and backup O-rings both fail, the whole launch system could explode. It's a revelation to the commission, but in hindsight, it is no surprise. The weekend after the start of the commission, the New York Times breaks the story.
It just concerned me terribly.
And the O-ring was your concern?
Yes.
Feynman and his colleagues learn of the teleconference the night before launch between NASA and Morton-Thiokol, and that the engineers' concerns were overruled. They start to piece the evidence together. It soon becomes clear that the engineers warned about the extreme low temperatures and wanted to postpone the launch. The commission focuses on the decisions made the night before the disaster. First, Feynman questions Robert Lund, the chief engineer at Morton-Thiokol.
Could you tell me, sir, the names of your 4 top SEAL experts in order of their ability?
Roger Boisjoly, I think, would be first.
What is your opinion, Mr. Boisjoly, about the SEALs, about the decision that was made? Were you in agreement with the result of the caucus that decided it was okay to fly?
No, I was not.
It's now clear to the commission that Boisjoly and Thompson's last-minute attempts to stop the launch were overruled. NASA's senior management made the final decision. Feynman is convinced that the engineers were right and that the cold is at the root of the problem. With the media watching closely, the Nobel Prize winner is about to use a high school experiment to demonstrate the fatal design flaw.
If this material weren't resilient for, say, a second or two, that would be enough to be a very dangerous situation.
Yes, sir.
I took this stuff that I got out of your seal and I put it in ice water. And I discovered that when you put some pressure on it for a while and then undo it, it doesn't stretch back. It stays the same dimension. In other words, for a few seconds at least, there is no resilience in this particular material when it's at a temperature of 32 degrees. I believe that has some significance for our problems.
It is a memorable moment. Feynman's simple experiment has made the technical problem easy for everyone to understand. What is not easy to comprehend is why NASA allowed Challenger to launch. They knew the danger, took a calculated risk, and lost. On May 2, 1986, the Presidential Commission investigating the Challenger disaster comes to an end. It finds that the cause of the explosion is the faulty design of the solid rocket booster joints, combined with other factors, primarily the effects of cold temperature. The Commission concludes that no one person is to blame. Richard Feynman is unhappy. He believes the truth has been glossed over and insists that his own conclusions be added to the official report. He states that NASA is not communicating effectively with its suppliers and failed to recognize the importance of the O-ring problem.
I don't think we've uncovered any grand conspiracy theories here. The truth is much simpler. What we found is that engineers and managers are not communicating effectively. It might be that NASA is understating the risks to ensure the supply of government funds, or they may simply believe that the shuttle is safer than their engineers claim. NASA owes it to the citizens from whom it asks support to be frank, honest, and informative, so that these citizens can make the wisest decisions for the use of their limited resources. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, because nature cannot be fooled.
2 years later, Richard Feynman dies, but with his work on the commission, he has done his country one last great service. No one at NASA is held accountable for the disaster. Roger Boisjoly's testimony irreparably damages his relationship with his managers and his co-workers. He leaves Morton-Thiokol just a few months after the commission hearings. He never returns.
I did nothing wrong. I did everything right along with my colleagues. And we paid a horrific price. And that's unfair. And I would do it again in a heartbeat.
That's the story of Roger Boisjoly, a modern-day Cassandra. He foresaw disaster, he foretold disaster, but he was incapable of preventing disaster. 7 astronauts died in the Challenger accident in 1986. It's a memorable event in the lives of most of us, and Roger Boisjoly was punished for being a whistleblower. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps, and in memory of the 7 Challenger astronauts and Roger Boisjoly, we will close tonight with a little of the Funeral March from Peer Gynt by Edvard Grieg.